Hi guys, Ronnie here and welcome to the workshop. Today I want to address another request based on the comments on my videos, and it's quite a common one. So today I want to tell you something about the training I do and the principles I follow. To be perfectly clear, I have never really used the help of a professional coach because there aren't many around, and I'm no expert on this theme by any means, but I still follow some rules of thumb and basically just common knowledge and common sense to prepare for the events that I do. And in the last 3 years, that's basically the only time I've been cycling in my life, I've managed to get up to a pretty decent level of fitness. So I'm going to talk about that briefly today. So if you look at my Strava account, I have all my training details over there. They're all public and all my rides. The first thing I try to do, the first thing you will notice is most of my rides are at pretty high intensity, and there are a couple of reasons for that. The first one is, to be honest, I hate riding my bike slowly, and if I do that, I'm not really enjoying it, and it doesn't seem to make too much sense. But on the other hand, sometimes I do easy rides. However, I'm a very light rider, so even if I do a pretty low wattage, I also have super aero position, so it might seem that I'm always pushing hard, but I don't go that much slower when I back the watts off, so that might be the reason. People are wondering about that, and most or the majority of my training work is, and it's what I really like to do, is so-called sweet spot training. So that's roughly 80% of your FTP for quite a long duration, so 20 to 40 minutes. This is set to improve your FTP, which in my case works quite well. You can incorporate this to endurance rides, and you can do this many times per week without building up too much fatigue. Now, there's also been a question about fatigue itself, so how do I recover from a hard week of training? The thing is that I really pay attention to my recovery, so sleep, most important, I think. I sleep quite a lot and at the right time, so I go to bed early and get up early. I pay attention to what I eat. That's a very controversial topic, so I don't really like giving advice on that because everyone seems to know better. So I'm going to skip this. And yeah, generally I try to stay off my feet as much as I can. Although when I have a lot of work to do here in the workshop, that's not really possible. So that's when I'm really feeling the price of that, when I'm standing all day long doing, basically just servicing bikes. As for very long endurance rides, I don't do those very often. However, recently, this season, I will do some pretty long races, high-level races that are quite long, so up to 4 to 5 hours. And for that, doing the power is not really that much of an issue if you're at a certain level, but you just have to get used to being on the bike for that long, dialing in your nutrition, your hydration, your clothing, your equipment, just to see you through that amount of riding. So that's also pretty important. And basically you can just use your common sense here. If you are not doing 5-hour road races, then you're probably never going to need to do or train 5-hour long endurance rides. and some people where it's kind of an amateurish mistake to go for the kilometers traveled, but that can vary wildly by the terrain and the level of the group you're in. So basically time and power, these are two absolute metrics in cycling and nothing else really matters. From the other intervals, where 99% of my training is interval training. I do structured workouts on Zwift when the weather is bad. Now luckily it isn't, so I ride a lot outside, or at least when I can, and I try to replicate that, but many people fall into the mistake of trying too hard to put an exact structure of intervals onto their outdoor training rides, which can be quite frustrating because, well, you can't really alter the terrain, the traffic, etc. So I try to use these to my advantage. So for example, I have lots of sharp climbs in my area where I ride, but not many long ones. But we also get quite a lot of wind, so if I do some FTP workouts, for example, I do that against the headwind because, well, that's quite natural. It increases your average speed, and that's how it would be in a race. It's always harder when the crosswinds and the headwinds appear. And then with the climbs, that's where I do my VO2 max or even higher intensity intervals. I really like doing those because they're also quite beneficial and also really fit those longer rides when you are in Z2, Z3 for most of the time, and then you just go really hard on these climbs and some of the sections, and that very nicely replicates basically how a road race would turn out. My weakest point as a cyclist, I think, is all-out sprinting. Of course, that comes down to my body type, and there's not really much I can do about that, but still working on the sprinting position to go as low as possible, to dial that cadence, dial that gearing, and just generally get used to the feeling. What does it do? When do you need to start a sprint? Yeah, it can be helpful, even if, well, my peak power isn't too great, but still I can hit pretty high speeds when sprinting compared to other riders who are doing much higher powers. So yeah, it's not all just about power, really. It's about using it in a clever way. That same goes for time trialing, road racing, breakaways, etc. So generally I like to, well, do all kinds of intensities during my training except Z1. Sometimes I do recovery rides, but they're a bit faster than they should be. That's a mistake maybe that I'm making, but generally my other training rides are so hard that compared to them I can still recover quickly from that. Last year I didn't do much endurance work at all, just very short rides up to 300 kilometers per week. Now I go as high as 600, maybe even more later on, but my body has been able to cope with that, so luckily I have no problems with overtraining and motivation. The only thing holding me back basically is, well, sometimes I do get quite a lot of work here, and after that it's quite hard to get going again. Now that the weather is nice, I also tend to put in some skill training. The cross bike repurposed for the summer, that's generally a very good thing for that, to practice wheelies, manuals, just hopping, bunny hopping, etc. So these are also quite useful skills to have. And many people also, if they have a time trial bike, they also make the mistake of not riding it enough, not riding it for long distances and in bad winds. Well, you need to do that in order to perform on race day and to be able to handle that bike, but I've already talked about that. So yeah, these are things that come to mind when it comes to training, and I think that these could prove useful or insightful. I know I wasn't very specific, but I'm no expert in the topic, unfortunately, or not yet, maybe. Another thing to keep in mind is that, well, if you have a specific event on your mind, then you should really do workouts that are specific or that mimic the kind of effort you put in. So for example, I wouldn't do sprint training before a week before a time trial, or I wouldn't do FTP work or too much of it anyway before a flat road race that's likely be ending up in a sprint finish. So yeah, I think you have to use your brain, you have to use your power meter and the terrain you have to get the best of it, but I think with common sense you can go a pretty long way in cycling. At least that's what I'm trying to do, lacking the opportunities that some other more developed countries in this area are having. So yeah, okay, I think that's all for today. Thanks for watching and see you next time.